My name is Todd Perkins, Todd Perkins. I'm running to be the next mayor of the city of Detroit. I currently practice law at the Perkins Law Group. That's deep. What's important to me is a sense of empathy, a sense of caring that I think sometimes has been lost. I've got 5 brothers, so there's a lot of sharing that goes on in the household when you have 5 brothers. And didn't grow up with much monetarily or materially, but we had each other. And that's something that I think is important about embracing this idea of moving into something that's a change for what I've been doing for the past 28 years. So I'm a kid born and raised in Detroit. I went to U of D High School, greatest high school there is. I know there's a lot of cast people in Detroit, so we go back and forth. But one of the mantras of the Jesuit tradition is men for others. And that's one of the sort of hallmarks in how I've lived my life, how I rear my kids, how I like to engage with other people, is a sense of giving. Because what I've learned is giving, you do receive. You know, it doesn't come back as a quid pro quo, but you receive something, you know, spiritually. You receive things, I think the monetary or the material side is really the secondary or even the tertiary aspect of the whole giving component. So that's what I am. I'm a Black Catholic boy who goes to Baptist church. My wife's Baptist, so therefore I'm going to church, and I love our pastor, Tellis Chapman, dynamic guy. As I've gotten older, I have to rely upon your faith. And I'll say one thing, you know, when I was practicing law as a younger man, I started when I was 26. I'm 55 today. And when I started and you get success, you think that success is you. But it's really the comedy of so many different things, and the pinnacle of that is God. And you have to understand that, and you have to humble yourself to the fact that you didn't do this, there's nothing we've done in our careers, anyone who's seen any kind of success, there's nothing that they've done all by themselves. Now, there's some portions and aspects of your life where you were out and ahead of everyone else, and you might not have seen the support that you think you needed, but there's support there, and there are other people who are supporting and praying for you when you don't even know it. And I believe those things have a positive effect in your life, in your trajectory, as well as it could have a negative effect depending on, you know, that old adage that your parents or your grandparents would say, you show me your friends, I'll show you your future. So what I've learned is that you have to keep the positive around you, because the negative is so easy to attract if you want it. Well, I think it's more than 4 years. I really do. You know, it's taken 12 years and even longer than that, because I think some of the progress was coming even before Mayor Duggan got in office. But look, it's taken 12 years to get here. So 4 years, if anyone is saying that they want to serve for the next 4 years, I think that's a non-starter. I believe that this is 8 to 12 year project as well. But definitely, I've always been the idea of an inclusive person, not exclusive. And because you're gonna get the best of everything there is to offer, the talent that the city has. I'm so tired of seeing all the talent that this city puts out. You know, if you go in any city, you think about it, Detroiters, when they go to other cities, they turn those cities out. And I want them to stay here and turn this city out. And because we see that exodus, you see kids graduating Cass, King, and going to college and not coming back. And I believe that that's the idea of the lack of inclusivity that they may not feel. So I really want to change the spirit of how we see ourselves and see the city. We see a lot of progress, and progress can be relative, because if you go over on the east side and you say about progress, they say, what progress? But you can point to downtown places on the east side, no matter how far you're away, you can still see downtown in various different points, no matter how far you're in the city, east or west, and people can point downtown and they say, but how does that affect me? So in that idea of progress being relative, I want the progress to be felt everywhere. Even if it hasn't met your street or met your block at that point, I want you to feel that. And because the idea of momentum, no one can question that. There is momentum, can't question that. But you can take that momentum and that inertia and continue to move that, move the ball in other areas that have not seen it. So one of the things that I think of, and people say, well, how are you gonna do this? I'm sure it's one of your next questions. I know it. I read your material, yours particularly, and I see all those questions. But you say, well, how are you gonna do this? Everyone who's running is not the current seated mayor. So the one who has the intuitive knowledge, the backdoor knowledge, is the person who's sitting in the seat right now. So everyone else is really kind of running from the outside, and they're really giving you their hopes and their dreams, but they also have to say, look, by doing that, it's almost like the draft. And that's what the citizens of Detroit have, a draft going on. And they're looking at the qualities that people bring. And that's what I believe that I bring, is superior qualities over the other candidates. Not that anybody's a bad person. I just think I'm better equipped to do it. So getting back to that question, my vision is, again, the inclusivity, to see progress happening in the neighborhoods, to see these economic centers that we used to have. I mentioned last night in my kickoff, and I was talking about people ask that question, who am I? People have seen me, on the news a lot. I have a lot of notable clients from here, Macomb County, all over the place, that gather news attention. And as a lawyer, I've always want the attention to be towards my client, or sometimes not. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes I don't want my client to have the attention, and I'll absorb that. Even so much so that other reporters have felt like, I've stepped on them in a sense, but I stepped in the way of whatever onslaught they had for my client, because that's what you do as a lawyer. You're a protector, you're an advocate. But at the same time, I think that's a grand question that you ask, and it's just not a very simple answer. But bringing back, like I said, I have a vision, and I look at myself as not too old not to be able to connect with the young, and not so young to be immature and not to be able to connect with generations that are older than myself. And I have enough historical knowledge to remember when I could walk in my neighborhood to the grocery store, and along the way buy, live poultry, live fish, back before I even got home. And this is all a 5-minute walk. And that is what I see. Now, is that something that we want to do today? Or do we want to have live poultry in the neighborhood? Maybe not that, but we do want more commerce in the individual larger neighborhoods that used to exist, and it doesn't right now. You get these big box shops that are positioned on the outside of our cities. Myers has come to our city, and I patronize them, and they're one of the first that really stuck a flag in the ground from the big box shops. But so yeah, my vision is being more inclusive in the momentum and the progress for the neighborhoods. How that happens probably be some of the next questions you got. And I didn't mean that to be rude, but I just, that is the most important thing, because everything is underpinned by having a safe, walkable community. Everyone wants to talk about, and every candidate we'll be talking about walkable communities, commerce, and all these things. But in order to enjoy those things, you have to be safe. And you have to have the sense of, in your mind, that you feel safe. And statistics are pointing downward, meaning that the world, or excuse me, the United States itself is becoming a safer place. Because what we don't have, I think the statistics that we don't have is how safe were communities before, I want to say 1930, maybe 1920. We don't have statistics here. But you know, this country was built off blood. You know, it took a revolution for us to even start. So those are the type of things that are part of our history. And we weren't tracking those things statistically. But, you know, right now we're looking at statistics that meet or match sometime in 1960s. But what we don't know, and what we're not factoring in there, is we were more than double the size today, or excuse me, double the size then than today. So the statistics themselves, they are pointing downward. There's no question about that. How much downward are they pointing? You have to factor in and put that, you know, input those numbers as to what that meant statistically back in 66 or 65, I think it was. And I still think we can do better. But getting back to it, public safety is the key. I don't know if I answered everything you asked me, but I hope, you know, I'm sure you'll get back to it. Well, you have to find out what you're capable of being able to do. You know, what I will be is I'll be transparent. I will be open with the community. I will tell them, and as we walk this walk all the way up to November, and you know, when I cross the threshold in November, that's one thing. I'll tell them what I want to do. You know, that question's been asked in a different way, and I'll tell you. They say, after you're elected, what are the first 3 calls you make, right? And I believe that the first 3 calls that you make, it should be 4. I think the first 4 calls I would make, first, I'd call the police department, because I said public safety is number 1. And that is number 1 in order to get to the things that you want to have happen in your city. So I call them. We're going to do better with what you've been doing. I think you've been doing a great job. I've seen police departments and worked with police departments or litigated with police departments all over the country, and Detroit has some of the finest police officers we have. They engage people differently than other cities. You know, I had a St. Louis, a lawyer friend who went to St. Louis, and I haven't been there for a case probably about 4 or 5 years, but you know, they don't really even engage. They just sort of monitor from afar, and then after something happens, they react to that. Detroit is more interactive now, and these officers they know how to talk to the citizens. And don't get me wrong, there are problems that happen anywhere when you have a large city. But the first 4 calls, public safety, or to the chief of police or public safety, which includes fire and police. The next call, even though the city does not control or run the school system, my next call is to Mr. Vitti. He is the superintendent of the largest school system in the city of Detroit. We have a lot of other schools now that, you know, you got Jalen Rose's school, and, you know, those are calls that I would make that are doing great work. Because if you're gonna have all these questions that you might have for me, or if you're gonna have a great city, it's gonna start with great schools. You know, because I talk to realtors, and you go talk to as many people as you can, as many people who will let you bend their ear, or let them bend my ear by engaging me in the conversation, because it's important to listen. And what a realtor told me is that, you know, oftentimes I see a young couple, 30 years old, you know, a kid, 2 kids, and they're about to buy a $250,000 condo or a house. What's the first question they ask? How are the schools? And so if we can't respond to that question, that the schools are excellent, they're putting out great products, and they are putting out great products. And let me not say call kids products, but for the purposes of statistical purposes, I'm using that. And if you can't, then people will go elsewhere. So, you know, great schools great neighborhoods, great city. So that's my next call, because I would want to know, he's been in that position for quite some time, but I think maybe 7 or 8 years now. He knows the things that keep him up at night. He knows the things that the city can do. And maybe the city is doing some of those things now, but I'm sure we can do more to help him in conveying some of the services that overlapped what we're already doing, to help him, and to help, perhaps with grant writing, because there's a big concern now with what's going on at Washington with this trying to destroy the Department of Education. That's a huge concern for a lot of people, especially people with kids. I mean, my kids are one in college and one's getting ready to go to college next year, but so my issues directly, not necessarily that concerning, but they are very concerning to me in a much bigger way, because if we're thinking about other people and have that sense of altruism and sense of caring, this is as concerning as it would be for my kids, is for these other people's kids, my neighbors' kids, whomever.
What are those third and fourth calls you would make?
The third and fourth call. The third call I would make is to the business community. I would convene them, or ask them to convene. You can only ask, But I think as mayor, you have a bully pulpit. People are going to want to hear from you, and I want to convene them, and I want to know what they see, and I want to know their vision. The same question, I think it's mostly what you want to do is you want to listen. You want to know what they want. And it's like these cards. I'll give you one of my cards. It says Todd listens. And on the back of the card, and so when I go to people's homes and I go to some community meetings, now if you're at a community meeting, you have 100 people. It's hard to get and corral people to fill out these cards, but on the back of the card, it's 5 things that they would like in their city, 5 things that they would want to know. And what you do is you're creating a lot of data. And when you look at that data, you might see a trend. I believe you'll see a trend over the course of reviewing that data that's going to point you in a direction that's what's most affecting or what's most concerning to the citizens. So those are the questions I would have to the business community. Then the fourth question, or the fourth call. The fourth call would be to the community organizations, because I think those community organizations, they deserve a seat at the table because they speak directly from their community, and they are members of those individual communities. Not every one of them, but there are some larger communities that are very active, that are very knowledgeable about what goes on in the city, and they will also, there's a community organization that I was talking to a guy the other day. I can't remember the organization, but they started a block club, there was an existing block club, and they became more active, so they absorbed another block club. And eventually they absorbed another block club. And so then they became almost like a regional kind of block club. And those are the organizations that you really want to bring to the table to let them know, hey, and the same issues that I have on those cards, I want to know from them. What are the things that you want? Because my plan is one that is going to go towards those community organizations, interacting in a way with the business community to bring the plan that I have and make the plan successful that I have for City of Detroit. Okay, and that's where the community organizations interacting with the police would come in. So I can do this a lot quicker. So so the community organizations working more in an interactive basis with police. I'll give you an example. When you go to a particular neighborhood and you're sitting around, driving around, and you're not really interacting, you don't know who runs this particular block. Because you'll see it, and you'll see it could be rosy, it could be sunny outside, but you don't know. That community organization does know. And so after 6 o'clock, you want to know who runs that block again. And then you want to, and you'll get that information by being interactive. And I know that the presence of police has an effect of some effect, but I'm not talking about over-policing. What I'm talking about is using technology. I think using data and gathering information that you get from your neighborhood is going to be a better way. But interacting with them and not necessarily being a foreigner to them at the time that, because oftentimes they don't know they're police officers. If they know they're police officers, it's going to be a lot easier to provide the services that public safety should be providing. Right. So that again is part of what I see as far as the interaction with a big part of what I want to do is interacting those larger scale community organizations with businesses, even the larger scale corporate businesses, because that's the way that you are going to support the small businesses that are in our neighborhoods to refresh, redesign, or grow what they're already doing in a way. I believe there's grants that are available for that, but not to mention the fact that if you take, there's a strategic neighborhood fund right now, and I believe corporations have donated to those strategic neighborhood funds. I'm looking for them to be more of a community quarterback, meaning that they're at the table and they're dealing with the community, and they're in a position that they see the value in doing this, and you say, well, why would the corporations do this? Well, corporations are driven by ROI, return on investment, and if you have a blank tapestry, your opportunity for investment and return on investment is, I believe, exponentially greater than even downtown. Well, by making it more affordable, you have to meld in there the idea of creating an atmosphere of jobs. And I want to create an atmosphere, not just of jobs, but of careers. And, we have people who have jobs who are nothing more than the working poor. There's very few families who miss a paycheck, you miss one paycheck and you're on the bread line. So the idea of creating an atmosphere, because the city doesn't create jobs, they create an atmosphere in which job creation will happen. I believe that increasing that economic base and increasing the opportunity for people to have and benefit from jobs that pay more, but you also have to have more houses. And I believe that the number I think other candidates have said, and I say that myself, is 10,000 houses. How do you do that? Well, we still have HUD dollars, and we don't know what's going to happen with that. A lot is not certain as to what you can have and what you can do. And we'll find that out in the coming months and in the next year. But I watch and I go down to this 36th District Court, and I talk to the judges who are there, who are talking about, and some of the landlords, and they don't have the housing stock. There's some people who have money and may not have the money for some of the more opulent places, but there's that middle area, or that even lower middle area, the availability of housing is not there. So I believe once you are able to start bringing more product to market, meaning more houses to market, that's going to, I think, set the table for people to have availability to housing, but it also your economy has to continue to grow. Well, that comes into play where are you going to get designations? This is historical designations, so you preserve these properties sort of in perpetuity. That's one aspect. But then you're also talking about the dynamic of the neighborhood changing, like some of the stories that you all have reported on over in Virginia Park. And there's one in my neighborhood in the lower North End, in which the people the residents who are there are very much against that property that's coming, or these slate of properties that are coming. But we need development. So, you got one thing and you have to balance that. What I want those people to do is, before litigation starts, because once people start suing each other, it's a shutdown. The lawyers are going to control it, the courts are going to control it, and you're not going to get any progress. Is to have that conversation. I don't believe that neighbors, if they've got 10 vacant lots, a person who lives in that neighborhood would love to see those lots developed, but there has to be some balance. If they're not the ones who are developing, you also have to be considerate of the person who is bringing the finances and the resources to develop. And I believe that that's where you sit at the table and you have some sort of compromise. And one of the things I also talk about is there are viable solutions to every problem. And I've spent my career on finding where the viable solution is to the problems. Well, I believe that making and bringing the schools to the parents, because what I've learned is that schools, the quality of school is also driven by the involvement of the parent. And I've seen schools in the suburbs where if there's a deficiency, that PTO will get together on a fundraiser and a bake sale, and they'll get that equipment for those kids, and they'll have that involvement. And the more involved a parent is, the more likely that young person is going to be not missing school or skipping school. So I want to make my pitch to the parents. But one thing I'm not going to do is I don't want to criminalize them. I mean, there are certain exceptions in the situation, but I don't want to, by promoting getting kids more involved in school, making school fun in the sense that making learning fun. I know I sound like a PSA, but that's real. But it's going to start with me interacting with the parents and finding out what their needs are, and finding and meeting with the parents, even if we have to have a committee going to different neighborhood organizations. Again, the neighborhood organizations are our key to getting to those people who are on the ground floor, who are on right there where we need to meet them at. And so getting into those organizations, we can find out who is this neighborhood, who are the people that work in this neighborhood. And you got parents that are working 12 and 14-hour days. They're gonna tell you, it's hard for me to make a meeting. And you have to understand that. But at some point in time, there has to be a balance, because it's not about you, it's about the younger generation, the kids that we have, and we have to support them. But it's gonna start with the parents. I think purely my background. Having been a lawyer, having been a person who's made their career off of solving problems and finding viable solutions to problems, but also, my activism. I have not held a political office, but I have done things that have affected our society in a positive way, whether it be Perkins rules on police stops, or whether it be the fight for reparations. And what I'll say about that is, I've always put my money where my mouth is. These have been self-funded campaigns, just like I believe that I was the only entity under the People's Voice, which was a organization that we created, a nonprofit organization that we created to be the voice for the people. And this has had nothing to do with politics. It has something to do with us feeling like we are included, feeling like we do have a voice. And it takes money to do those things. It takes resources, it takes professionals, and those professionals have to be paid. And, I was the only individual who I believe that was financially involved with the reparations movement. Then they had Black Lives Movement. And so I wanted to do things to make our younger people and our people proud. Humility. Acknowledging, okay, if this is messed up, or if we went the wrong direction, let's absorb that and find out what we do. Because I've learned in my career, I've learned more from my losses than my victories. Now, I've had a lot more victories than losses, but you take those back, and so out of some of those losses, many of those losses, I found victory for the client, but it came with a sense of humility. It has to start there. We are all humbled in the eyes before God, and we should be humble. The idea of washing the leper's feet, you have to take that and believe in that. And when you believe in that, it becomes, it ain't easy. You know what I'm saying? It's, especially when you're supposed to be someone who people regard as an elite professional. But even then, you have to be humble. And my dad taught me that. And he says, listen, no matter how good you get or how high you rise, the idea of humility will always keep you grounded. And all of my team, all of them have to have that sense of humility, because it also promotes this idea of caring and an idea of empathy and the ability to be accessible. going to see them where they're at. It was like the idea where as a lawyer, I've been in classrooms, I've been in Coney Islands, I've been in workplaces, I've been in people's living rooms, and people's jails and people's detention centers all over the country. And that's the idea of meeting people where they're at. It sometimes it's just a phone call, and sometimes it's a show up, unannounced, at a community meeting, and they say, that does matter to them. And you'd be surprised about the effect that it has on people when you're there just because you care. It is something that happens internally in us that it's like magic. Well, we also have to consider that from a regional perspective and within Detroit. And I believe that, so one of the issues that currently I met with the unions and have talked to them because they're concerned that they're going to reduce, the city's going to reduce. The city's concerned, the administration's concerned, they say, well, I'm buying all these buses and no one's riding them. What we have to do is marketing. A big thing, it's what you guys do here. It drives everything. And the idea of marketing what we have, the product that we have, the on-time schedules that we have, the availability of more routes that we have, that is one of the keys to that, because we have people, younger people like yourselves, who are leaving Detroit because they want to go to communities where they can use mass transit. And along with mass transit, you can't go back. Let's go back to the first thing we're talking about, public safety. So people have to feel safe. So all of these things are intertwined, but then I mentioned the regional. The regional component is one in which, just being outside of Detroit, because there's a lot of jobs that people who work outside of Detroit and that would like to use mass transit. But it's also that's going to be the ability to stay engaged with, the county execs from Oakland, Macomb, and Washtenaw, because that makes up Southeast Michigan, and you want to be able to have those routes, which is, for a long time, they didn't want Detroiters in their community. So I think there's a sea change in that, and but marketing is, back to your answer, I don't want to talk too much sometimes, but marketing is, I think, letting people know that we're going to be on time, these are the routes, and you'll be safe in getting there. Well, that's an interesting question, because as much as you want to grow, you have to be concerned how are you going to grow. And this person wants to come in here and they're an industry that does release things into our environment. But it's also an element of compromise. I'll give you an example. There is funding for people to have solar panels, because if we reduce the amount of utility services, we're also reducing the effect on the economy. And that comes with solar panels. I believe with a lot of the housing that I can see that's coming to the city of Detroit, that's going to be built, and the rehabs that are going to be built, the idea of having those houses built in green, in a green mentality, one that uses only minimal amount of utilities, is one way. But again, the idea of just being overt and that this is going to be part of our mantra, that starts the ball rolling. And they come to the table with ideas, for people who want to come in, and I'm talking about businesses. Because I think businesses, residents themselves, we burn a lot of utilities and release a lot of, whether it be carbons or what it uses to create that the electricity and services that come to our house. But coming to the table with those ideas of looking at the more green products that are available, that's just a start. But that's a multifaceted component, because you have the residential, commercial, and then industrial that you have to be considering. Well, then we're going to return back to being transparent. So first, what I intend to do is, within the first, I guess, I didn't even answer that question about the first 30 days in office. I turned it into the 4 questions that I would do. But getting back to it is, I want to do a forensic audit. I want to audit everything. I want to know how money's spent, where money is spent, because I know that some of those ARPA funds that you were talking about, Ms. Curry, they were used for the purposes of shoring up the budget in some areas. So it really wasn't, I know that they are using some of those funds to, I see the increase in services through the court system. I've seen what Mayor Duggan has done, but those are services that I believe will continue. But before I can really answer that question, other than saying, look, I don't see, I see that that's the end of the ARPA funds, but that's not going to be the end of our funding. I'm very confident that our president, as much as he may has done some wild and crazy things in his 3 months or 4 months in office, I look at it from this perspective. As a lawyer, I'm going to engage him and say, listen, Mr. President, you won Michigan. You understand that the idea of so goes Detroit, so goes Michigan. So you have to help Detroit for the purposes of helping those who helped put you in the office. So that's one of my conversations that I would have on a national level. But before I can really answer that question, I have to know where all the finances are going, because I know that some of the finances that are earmarked for certain areas are not being used in that area, in that particular area, and some of them have been used for the purposes of shoring up the budget so that we do have a balanced budget. So without those ARPA funds today, it may be, the argument could say, we wouldn't have had a balanced budget for the entire 11, 12 years. So that's I guess how I could best answer that question right now with the limited information that I have. Absolutely. That was one of the things that I said as it relates to law enforcement. That, you know, one thing that you can do with tech, a lot of tech is driven by data. And that's why the increase in data and the seeking that information and then being able to use technology to determine how best to resolve a particular issue from a public safety perspective. You know, I know I've probably mentioned public safety so many times, but I think it's so important that you want to be on that downward trajectory, because again, we're still in the bottom tiers for public safety around the country, or excuse me, crime statistics and education. So just like you had mentioned in your question, but using technology, absolutely. And I believe that where Apple's coming to our city, we're moving in that tech-driven area for quite some time. It's really been a sort of an undercurrent, but I believe it's going to come to the surface. So when you see companies like Apple that are coming in such a grand fashion, there are going to be a lot of ancillary businesses and small business development that I want our Detroiters and these young people who are getting out of school, who may go away to school, but you want them to come back to our city and take advantage of that tech movement. I think there's been a tech movement that's been going on in the city for quite some time. I'll be Detroit's next mayor because I know how to engage people. I'm seeking what the people want, and I'm going to be transparent in what I can give them. After I gather the information that's necessary to be able to answer those questions, just like I couldn't answer Ms. Curry's question to the ability that I would like to answer, because I don't know what all the finances and the financial structure and what the administration is doing. I don't think really anyone knows, even city council members who are running. Only have what information that's conveyed to them that has to be conveyed through public filings and public hearings and some of their interaction with those offices. But my ability to engage people, my ability to, and my desire to see that people are included in this momentous event, this positive momentum, I believe that's what's going to carry me over. And my experience in doing what I've done for the past 28 years.